Okay, so I'm now going to cover the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. And first of all, I'm going to cover the Yalta, which is in February 1945, and I cover the issues that they were raised there, and then what was decided, and then I cover the agreements and disagreements at Potsdam in July to August 1945, as well as those who were present and people that were there. So the issues to be addressed at Yalta and Potsdam was quite clear. It was clear by early 1945 that Germany would be defeated. It was clear that the Allies would win, and so the Allies needed to focus on the problems that the defeat of Germany would bring. And these were challenges that the US, the USSR, and Britain would all have to face as a collective. They would have to decide what to do with defeated Germany, its leaders. They'd have to decide what to do with the countries formerly occupied by Nazi Germany, many of which were in the Eastern Europe kind of sphere of influence area. They would have to decide the future of Poland. They had to decide how the war with Japan could be ended as soon as possible, especially as America were quite keen on this due to the incidents at Pearl Harbor. And then discuss how a long-lasting peace will be maintained or could be maintained after the event. So in Yalta, February 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin met at Yalta in the Ukraine to discuss these issues. So the issue of what to do with the defeated Germany was decided on by a fact that a surrender was to be unconditional. Germany, its capital Berlin, would be temporarily divided into 4 occupation zones, each owned by each of the countries involved: US, Russia, England, and France. Germany's eastern borders was to be moved westwards. War criminals were to be hunted down and punished, and Germany would have to pay reparations. With the issue of what to do with countries formerly occupied by Germany, they would be liberations that would be held, and then they would be allowed to hold free elections to decide how they would be governed, who would be governing them, and what kind of parties would be governing them. For the future of Poland, a provisional government was to be established, comprising of pro-Soviet Lublin Poles and exiled London Poles who fled in 1939. So it had a mixture of both capitalistic and communist views and had parts of different countries. Poland's borders were to be moved westwards into German territory, and free elections were to be held to actually decide on the more permanent government past the provisional government setup. About how war could be ended in Japan, Stalin agreed to intervene in the war against Japan after Germany was defeated, and in return, Russia and the USSR was to receive the land from Manchuria and the other territory lost to Japan during the 1904 to 1905 Russo-Japanese War. And if you didn't know earlier about the Manchuria incident in 1931, in which it was taken over by Japan and became Manchukuo, that's a good video to watch. It's one of my previous videos. And then for how a lasting peace was to be maintained, an organisation known to be known as the United Nations was to be set up. Now, this was meant to be an improved league, a better league, and if you didn't know, the United Nations still exists today. Not quite in the same form, but essentially in the same form, and it was an organisation set up to maintain the peace. So, in the intermittent period between the Yalta Conference in February 1945 and the Potsdam Conference in July-August 1945, President Roosevelt died in April and was replaced by Harry Truman, who was a strong anti-communist and also quite inexperienced in international affairs. In Britain, the Conservatives and Churchill's party were defeated in the general election. He was replaced by the Labour leader Clement Attlee. And the Soviet Union liberated Eastern Europe and was installing sympathetic governments, and they had failed to hold free elections. So, as you may have heard in the Cold War episodes, they were essentially just installing their own communistic governments, ignoring the free elections. So on the eve of Potsdam, Truman informed Stalin that the United States had successfully tested an atomic weapon. Now, this could be seen as quite a threatening move. It could be seen as quite a public move, especially in the arms race that was happening to do with the Cold War. But actually, Stalin was already aware of this due to his heavy spying that him and the rest of the USSR had been doing on America. So it wasn't so much of a surprise, but it was quite, in many ways, an imminent threat. So the Potsdam Conference happened July to August 1945 near Berlin between Truman, Attlee and Stalin, and there was much disagreement and quite a little agreement because of the combating personalities, and unlike the previous years when Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin had quite a friendly relationship between each other, these were three blokes who hadn't met that much and were all very different opinionated and very different views. When they met, that caused a lot of conflict. So the agreements made at Potsdam were that the Polish-German border was the Oder-Neisse line, line formed by two rivers. The Nazi Party was to be banned. Germany was to be denazified, and war crime trials held for anyone thought to be involved in war crimes. And then the decision to split Germany and Berlin into 4 zones was fermented and confirmed. And each country was to take reparations from its own zone. So it would earn the money through that zone, it would take the income from that zone, things like that. So actually, really, the agreements that were made was just confirming the Germany being divided and reparations clause of Yalta, and then making sure that Germany was being denazified and that the Nazi Party was unestablished. So it was got rid of, it was banned. So actually, even though it may be 5 or 6 points that were established, actually not much was really achieved. Whereas in disagreement, there was no agreement reached over the future government of Poland, which left it in quite an unstable state. There was disagreement over actual Germany, seeing as Stalin wanted to fully cripple Germany to prevent further threats, whilst Britain and America were quite adamant on keeping it to a strong level, especially Truman, who wanted to use it as a buffer against the communists. And then the USSR wished to intervene in the war against Japan, but they were actually refused by Truman. And this kind of goes against what was happened in Yalta, when USSR basically governed that they would go into war in return for Manchuria, otherwise known as Manchukuo, for their contribution to the war, but they were banned. And so the results of the Potsdam Conference, from wartime alliance to Cold War, was that the USA and the USSR emerged from the Second World War as the superpowers and were prepared to take each other on. And the failures that happened at Potsdam highlighted these increasingly big differences between the two parties and showed the big conflicts that they have. So Winston Churchill, former British Prime Minister, made the Iron Curtain speech, and he referred to it as descending over Europe, dividing Eastern Europe from Western Europe, and it was essentially taking democracy to communism, which was quite a big point. And this is actually a quote from the speech he made in March 1946 in America. And it goes, "A shadow has fallen upon the scenes so lately lighted by the Allied victory. From Stettin on the Baltic to Trieste on the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended. Behind that line lie all the states of Central and Eastern Europe. The communist parties have been raised to power far beyond their numbers and are seeking everywhere to obtain totalitarian control. This is certainly not the liberated Europe we fought to build, nor it is one which has allowed permanent peace." And this speech was made by Churchill after he was Prime Minister. He didn't really hold any power, apart from the fact he was quite a respected man in politics. But Stalin accused Churchill of essentially trying to provoke war, and Stalin kind of described what Stalin describes as the Iron Curtain, he described as a buffer zone, and he had a kind of speech against Churchill that kind of detailed how the Soviet Union was entitled to this area of sphere of influence that Churchill would often call the Iron Curtain. So that's basically the impacts of Potsdam and Yalta on global politics. It really showed the clear divide between the two real superpowers in the world and created a high amount of tension within the Cold War. But it also dealt with what would happen with Germany and other such factors that would later on affect the Cold War. And you can watch the rest of my video on the Cold War to find out more details on that.